I moved into the duplex on Ormsby Lane because it was cheap, and I didn't want anyone asking why. The listing said quiet area, and it was right. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like everything had already been said and no one was allowed to speak again. The house sat low on the street, a square brick unit with wood paneling that peeled like sunburned skin. My unit was on the bottom floor. The upstairs was occupied by an older tenant I hadn't met yet, but I could hear her walking above me the first night. Slow, deliberate steps that never wandered too far from the center of the room. I spent the first few days unpacking, but it was mostly junk. I wasn't sentimental, just stubborn. Things came with me because they always had. The couch smelled faintly of smoke and the TV stand leaned sideways even when the floor didn't. I didn't care. No one was coming over. On the third day, I met her. I was coming back from the hardware store with a box of drawer handles when she called down to me from her porch railing. "You're the new one," she said, like she'd been waiting for me to realize it. I looked up. She was hunched in a chair with a blanket around her knees even though it was 70 degrees. Thin white hair pulled back, thick glasses, one leg braced with something that looked homemade. "Dean," I said. "Moved in Sunday." She nodded like she already knew. "I'm Mrs. Salter. I live above you. Don't bang the cabinets at night, and I won't flush during your showers. Deal?" I gave her a half smile and said, "Deal." She watched me a second longer before her voice shifted. Not angry, not nervous, just flat. "There's one more thing." I paused on the step. "If you see a funeral come through the street, just stay put. Don't go out. Don't follow it. You can watch it, but that's all. Don't even try to see where it goes." I waited for the punchline, but she didn't smile. Just turned and went back inside. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't think about it again until 2 weeks later. I just finished eating and was standing by the sink rinsing a plate when I heard the sound of shoes on asphalt. Not cars, not bikes, footsteps, rhythmic, measured. I turned off the faucet and listened. The footsteps were too many to count, too consistent to be casual. I moved to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside just an inch. They were walking in a single line down Ormsby Lane, at least 24 people, maybe more, all dressed in black, coats, veils, gloves. Some wore hats from another era. Their faces were pale and unreadable, eyes down, expression slack. There was no hearse, no car at all, just the steady shuffle of feet on pavement. No one else was outside. Every porch was empty. Every curtain was drawn. I watched them go past. Not a single one of them looked at me, not until the very last. At the tail end of the line, a man in a black overcoat and polished shoes paused just before the bend in the street. His face wasn't turned toward me, not directly, but his head angled slightly, and I saw the side of it. His cheek, his jaw. He was younger than the others, maybe my age, but something about his posture, it made my stomach tighten. And then he walked on. They turned the corner and were gone, swallowed by the street beyond. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the curtain fell shut and I stepped away. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was afraid, at least that's what I told myself. It was just strange, like something I shouldn't have seen but didn't know why. Like walking in on a stranger's funeral and realizing halfway through that everyone knew your name. I didn't mention it to Mrs. Salter. She didn't mention it to me. She didn't say much of anything after that. The next day, I noticed the empty lot across from the duplex had tire tracks in the dust. A car had been there recently, parked facing the road. But now it was gone. Nothing but the marks where the wheels had sat. Later that week, I struck up a conversation with a guy at the gas station just past the county line. He wore a mechanic's uniform and had the name Jude stitched on the chest. I mentioned where I lived, Ormsby Lane, and watched his expression drop a little. "Damn," he said. "You're in that part of town? Rent's low." He scratched the side of his face. "You hear about that kid went missing a few years back? Jason something?" I shook my head. Lived on that street, I think. Last anyone saw of him, he'd gone out late. Friend said he was talking about some weird funeral walk, like no cars or nothing. just people walking at night. Said he wanted to see where they were going. What happened? Never came back. They found his car near the old cemetery gate out past Ridgeway. Door still open, keys in the seat. Nobody ever saw him again. I didn't say anything. Just paid for my gas and left. When I got home, I looked up the cemetery on my phone. It was small, closed down years ago. No new burials, barely maintained. I couldn't find any record of the boy, Jason, but that didn't mean much. Missing people blur together in towns like this. A few nights later, it happened again. I was in bed with the light off when I heard the footsteps return. They were slower this time, more of them. I didn't get up right away. I stayed still, listening as they passed my window. When I finally moved, I walked to the front door, careful not to make a sound, and peeled back the curtain just enough to see. They were exactly the same. Black clothes, silent, no expression. But this time I noticed something else. Their shoes left marks, wet black impressions on the concrete, smudges that didn't fade even when the rest of the night did. I waited until they were gone. Then I stepped outside barefoot, feeling the cool grit of the step under my feet. The prints went all the way down the road, curving out of sight. The next morning I grabbed a notepad and retraced the route. I took photos with my phone, not of the people, just the trail, the path they took, the shape of the street, where they walked, where they turned, the exact corners. I sketched it all out, carefully, thoroughly. It never occurred to me, not even for a second, that I was following them. I didn't hear the knock that night, but I did notice something when I stepped outside the next morning. My front doormat was gone. In its place was a patch of dirt, not quite mud, flattened like someone had been standing there for hours. The shape was too big for a shoe, too long, like a heel that never moved, and there was a faint scent in the air, earthy but not natural, like flowers from an old bouquet, the kind that were meant to be left on top of something. I checked the neighboring units. Their doormats were fine. No prints, no trampled earth, just mine. I didn't touch the patch of dirt. I swept around it. I stepped over it. By midday the next day, it had crusted dry and turned the same color as the concrete, but I knew it was still there. I didn't bring it up with Mrs. Salter, mostly because I didn't want to explain why I was even out there. Besides, she hadn't spoken to me since our first meeting, and I wasn't sure if she would again. The next few days passed like a film with the sound turned down, quiet neighbors, drawn blinds, the hum of window units fighting against the heat. I kept my routines tight and uneventful. Groceries, sleep, work on my laptop. I reread the lease out of boredom. I counted 6 locks on the door and only used 2. The second time I heard the funeral coming, I was ready. It was a little after 1 in the morning. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV running low and woke to the strange muted rhythm of dozens of feet moving in unison. This time, I didn't hesitate. I stood, moved to the window, and pulled the curtain back, just enough to see them clearly. They were identical to before. Men and women in thick black garments, arms at their sides, walking without a sound, not even breath. Their shoes moved as if they weighed nothing at all. I could almost believe they were floating if not for the soft scuffs of leather on asphalt. Their clothing looked old, not costume old, but time-worn. Some had frayed sleeves, others wore gloves yellowed with age. One woman had a small black umbrella open above her head even though the sky was dry and clear. The same order, same faces. I spotted the man from last time at the rear again, though this time he didn't look back. They passed my window and kept walking, their pace steady, their formation unbroken. As they rounded the far curve of Ormsby Lane, I leaned into the glass, following them with my eyes until they slipped behind the trees. Then I did the thing I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to do. I opened the door, stepped outside, and looked down. The footprints were back, dozens of them, same as before. Wet, black, impossibly neat in a long serpentine pattern winding down the street. I crouched and touched one. Damp, cool, but not water. The scent was faintly metallic, like the inside of a rusted tin. I got my phone and took a picture, then another. Then I started following the trail with my eyes, noting the way it curved across the cracked road and veered left at the corner where the old oak tree hung low over the sidewalk. I told myself I wasn't following. I wasn't walking behind them. I just wanted to know where it led. That was the first mistake. The next morning, I walked the same route in daylight. The tracks were gone by then, dried up or absorbed. But I remembered the turns. I followed them past the old corner store with its blacked-out windows, down a narrow side street lined with chain-link fences and laundry poles, then out toward a cul-de-sac I didn't remember seeing before. At the far end of that street was a rusting gate with a locked chain and a narrow strip of pavement running into woods I'd never noticed on the map. There was a car parked just outside the gate, or what was left of one. The paint was sun-faded and blistered, and the windshield had long since been smashed. The license plate was coated with pollen and dust, but I could still make out the letters, JDN 70842. The keys were in the ignition. A pair of sunglasses sat on the dash, warped from heat. The seatbelt was unbuckled, but the fabric had a deep crease across it, like it had stayed clicked in for a long time before suddenly being yanked away. I walked around the car slowly, then backed away without touching anything. That night, I sat in the living room with all the lights off and blinds drawn. I didn't want to see them pass again. I didn't want to watch. I waited for the sound of footsteps, but none came. The next morning, I opened the door and found the dirt patch gone. In its place was my old doormat, only it wasn't wet or dirty. It was scrubbed clean like someone had taken it and washed it and returned it, perfectly aligned with the door frame. It took me a minute to realize that unnerved me more than the dirt ever did. I stood there a long while, not knowing whether to move or speak or call someone. Call who? What do you even say? Someone cleaned my doormat and put it back? Someone walked past my house in the middle of the night dressed like it was 1912 and left behind footprints that disappear in the morning? My landlord wouldn't care. The police wouldn't understand. When I finally moved again, I found myself going back to that rusted gate. It was barely a 20-minute walk, maybe less if you took the back roads. I didn't approach the car again, just walked past it slowly, glancing out of the corner of my eye. Still untouched, still sunken in. The fence behind the gate had more than rust on it. It had names, dozens of them, some scratched into the metal, others scrawled in ink or chalk or faded marker. One was fresh, Jason D., 2011. The year was underlined twice. That night, I Googled Jason D. Ormsby Lane and turned up one blog post archived from an old true crime forum. A user named Way Down River had posted a thread about missing persons cases in the county. Jason D., 17, last seen walking alone near Ormsby Lane. Friend said he liked to stay up late, wander. His mother filed a missing person report 2 days later. Search turned up nothing. There were no comments on the thread, no updates. The last login for Way Down River was 10 years ago. I went outside just to breathe, just to clear my head. The air was heavy and still. No wind, no cars. I crossed the street and stood where the funeral procession had passed both times, looking down at the cracks between the road panels. I took out the notebook and started sketching the route. I drew the turns, the alleys, the tree with the twisted base, the cul-de-sac, the gate. I marked the car, the fence, the list of names. I didn't realize my hand was trembling until I saw the jagged lines down the right side of the page. When I looked up, Mrs. Salter was watching me from her window. She didn't wave. She didn't blink. She just watched. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying Mrs. Salter's expression in my head. Not alarm, not anger, just a kind of knowing sadness, as if she'd already lived through whatever came next and couldn't stop it from happening again. The next morning, I avoided looking up at her window. I stepped outside just after sunrise, still groggy, and nearly tripped. My doormat was gone again. This time, it wasn't replaced with dirt. It was replaced with a patch of grass. Real grass, like someone had cut a rectangle of turf from a field and laid it down in front of my door. There was dew on the blades, crushed spots where it had clearly been stepped on. A footprint pressed faintly into the corner. Narrow heel, shallow arch. Too long to be mine. I backed into the doorway and just stared at it. The edges of the turf weren't cut clean. They were torn ragged, as if it had been ripped from the earth instead of dug. It didn't belong here. None of this did. I grabbed a broom and pushed it off the step, watching blades of it cling to the concrete. The roots were dry. Soil clumped around the base like it had been scooped hastily and dumped. I didn't throw it out. I didn't touch it with my hands. I swept it to the side of the yard and left it there. Then I did what I should have never done. I went inside, pulled out the notebook, and added a new page. Incidents after second funeral. I wrote down everything. The grass, the missing mat, the single footprint. Then I turned back to the trail map and resumed drawing. Not because I wanted to understand anymore. I think at some level, I needed it to mean something. Needed the pattern to become visible. If I could just outline the route, chart the pace, plot where they turned and why, they'd stop coming. I went out again with my phone, retracing the path. It was still early. No one else on the street, just pigeons flapping off wires and a dog barking somewhere far off. The footprints were gone. Of course they were. But I knew where they'd been. I walked slow, following memory, matching angles to corners, lines to alleys. I didn't realize until I reached the cul-de-sac again that something was off. The gate was still there, the car too, but the road I'd taken to get there, the alley between the old store and the broken fence, it wasn't there anymore. There was a building in its place, a laundromat, glass-fronted neon open sign buzzing faintly behind dusty windows. I could see the machines spinning inside, full of clothes. The parking lot was cracked, overgrown. I stood there for minutes trying to understand what I was looking at. Had it been there yesterday? Had I walked right past it and not noticed? I stepped closer, looked at the foundation. It wasn't new. The cracks in the cement were old, deep, with weeds pushing through. One side was missing siding. The address above the door was faded to the point of invisibility. I turned around slowly, scanning the surrounding buildings. They weren't in the same order. The alley was gone, the fence was gone, and the utility pole I'd used to orient myself, marked with that rusted metal number plate, was now split at the base and leaning like it had been struck years ago. The route I drew didn't match what was in front of me. I checked the time on my phone. 9:17 a.m., then again, 10:42. I hadn't walked more than 5 blocks. I looked at my watch to confirm. It was still 9:17. I felt a rush of pressure in my ears, like altitude sickness or holding your breath too long. I leaned against the wall and stared at the notebook. The map I'd drawn was suddenly wrong. Streets that should have curved were straight. A 4-way intersection was now a roundabout. A small row of empty houses I'd passed last week had somehow become a gas station with prices from the 90s. I shut the notebook and walked back home faster than I wanted to. Every turn felt slightly off, every sidewalk too long. When I passed Mrs. Salter's mailbox, I reached out and touched it just to prove I was still where I belonged. The turf was still in the yard. Flies buzzed around it now. I locked the door behind me, turned every bolt. I went over the notebook again inside, line by line, and realized the problem wasn't that I'd made a mistake. It was that the path had moved. The next morning, I drove the route to be sure. The laundromat was gone again. The alley was back, but it was narrower, darker. The fence on one side had more slats missing than before, and a pile of garbage bags leaned against the bricks where none had been before. A new tag had appeared on the wall, a series of overlapping circles, like ripple marks, drawn in black. I pulled over and stared at it. My phone buzzed. Voicemail, no missed call. I played it, nothing but static. Then a faint scuffling noise, like something dragging across carpet. Then silence. I deleted it and put the phone in the glove box. I walked the last few blocks back to the gate. The car was still there, but now there was something else beside it. Another patch of grass, smaller than the one on my doorstep, but just like it, fresh, torn, damp at the roots. I didn't go closer. I turned around and went home. That night, I stayed up with the lights off, sitting in the corner of the living room with the blinds open just a crack. I waited. The funeral never came. But at 2:11 a.m., I heard something new. Not footsteps, not shoes, breathing from outside my window, slow, even. I didn't move. I didn't go to the curtain. The sound went on for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. The next morning, I opened the door slowly. The doormat was back again, perfectly placed, but this time there were 2 black handprints on it, one on each side, pressed down hard, fingers long, pressed close together. The right one was missing its middle finger. I didn't open the door all the way. I just stared at those handprints on the mat, one full, the other missing the middle finger, and quietly shut the door again. It took a while to start moving after that. I sat at the table and tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Kids, a prank. But I'd lived here long enough to know there weren't any kids nearby. The houses on Ormsby Lane weren't built for families. They were places people came to leave quietly, not raise children. I spent most of the day inside with the windows closed, blinds down. I didn't touch the mat. Eventually, sometime before dusk, I opened the door again. The handprints were gone. Not faded, gone. The mat was clean, too clean. Not a speck of dust or leaf on it. It looked like it had never been touched at all. I didn't take it inside. I stepped around it and walked down the street. My notebook was in my back pocket, the one with the route I'd sketched. I needed to see if the streets matched, needed to know if something had changed, or if I'd just gone off the rails. The walk started off normal, the same broken sidewalk, the same dip where the drainage always backed up after rain. But then I turned the corner near the old gas station, and the first thing I noticed was that the building had no graffiti anymore. None. The sidewall had been covered in it since the day I moved in, at least 3 layers deep, faded tags and bubble letters. Now it was scrubbed clean. The windows were still boarded up, but the wood was new, fresh nails, no weather stains. I looked across the street to orient myself. The yellow house with the collapsed porch roof, gone. In its place, a brown single-story home I'd never seen before, with plastic lawn chairs arranged on the stoop like someone expected company. I pulled out my notebook, flipped to the map. The streets were supposed to bend slightly here, but the road ahead ran straight for 3 blocks. I knew because I could see the telephone poles lining it like fence posts, equally spaced sharp in the daylight. I walked, slow at first, watching my surroundings shift with each block. The red bench I remembered sitting at was now green. The diner sign that used to flicker didn't even exist anymore. The lot was empty gravel. But the name of the road was the same. I checked the street sign twice. That's when I noticed the time. My phone said 1:48 p.m. I'd left the house just before noon. I checked the weather app, same time. Then my watch, 12:17. I tapped the glass, nothing. It ticked once and stopped. I tried retracing my steps, took the right turns, marked everything, but the buildings were wrong. Shrubs where fences used to be, alleys that ran too deep, too narrow, nothing lined up. I crossed the street where I should have passed the old bus stop, but it was gone too. Just a patch of concrete with 4 bolts still embedded, like something had been ripped up fast and left unfinished. I started walking faster. A corner store sat at the edge of a lot with a rusted fence. The display window showed rows of dusty candy and old magazines. I ducked inside, and the man behind the counter didn't say a word, just watched. I asked him what street we were on. He didn't answer, just turned the radio up behind him, static fuzz and distant piano notes. I left before he could move. By the time I found my way back to Ormsby Lane, the light had shifted. The sun was still up, but it was lower. The shadows had lengthened. My phone read 4:02. There was dirt on my shoes I didn't remember stepping in, a scratch on the back of my hand, thin and shallow, like a thorn had caught me mid-turn. The mat was still there when I got home, but now the corner of it was flipped up, and a single black shoelace lay curled just underneath like it had fallen off someone's foot in a hurry. I threw it away. The map I'd drawn no longer made sense. It wasn't just wrong, it was useless. I looked at it for an hour, then flipped to a blank page and started again. I drew what I saw now, not what I remembered. I charted the new layout, the shifted roads, the streets that led nowhere. It didn't help. I slept for maybe 2 hours that night. I woke up once with a feeling that someone had just left the room, but I was alone. No noise, no movement. The mat was missing again. In its place, this time, was a shoe. Black scuffed leather, laces still tied, long and narrow, too long to be mine. It was damp. I checked the inside. There was dirt caked in the sole and a crease in the heel like it had been stepped on wrong. No mate, just the one. I put it in a trash bag and dropped it in the bin behind the corner market. I didn't care who saw me. I didn't bother retracing the funeral path the next day. I tried walking somewhere else instead, north, away from the cemetery, away from the gate. I wanted fresh air, a clean route, something normal. I ended up back on Ridgeway somehow. The same cracked sidewalk, the same leaning mailbox with half the flag rusted off. I'd turned away from it an hour ago, but here I was again. When I reached the gate, I didn't go all the way this time. I stopped at the car. It hadn't moved, still sunken in the dirt, still bearing that same warped license plate. But someone had opened the trunk. It was just ajar, an inch, maybe 2. The metal groaned when I pushed it fully open. Inside, nothing but a single flower, wilted, pressed flat like it had been caught in the wind and pinned there by mistake. I closed it gently. The gate beyond had a new sign, not posted, etched into the metal bar near the top rail. Lines carved shallow and crooked like someone had used a key or the edge of a coin. 4 words: "You went too far." No punctuation, no name. I stepped back and nearly tripped. In the dirt beneath me were the same footprints from before, dozens of them, crisp despite the dry ground, all facing toward the gate, not one leading back. The footprints didn't scatter or cross each other. They were perfectly aligned, pairs facing one direction toward the gate and nowhere else, like they had arrived but not left. I stood in the middle of them and felt something tighten in my chest, like the air was denser here. I checked the trees, the horizon, anywhere something might move. Nothing moved, but the quiet felt like a held breath. I didn't push on. The gate was still locked. No sign of keys, no signage, no maintenance trail. Just that rusted chain and the new scratch-lettered warning up top. I took a few steps back and noticed something sticking out of the grass to the right of the path, near the bend in the fence. It looked like a post at first, maybe part of a broken marker, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't metal. It was wood, the top rounded smooth from handling. A faint groove spiraled down its length, worn in with time, and the base of it was sunk into the dirt, not driven, like it had been planted there and left to rot. I crouched down. It was a walking stick, still upright, old, but not forgotten. The grip still bore the sheen of oil from a palm, the kind of sheen that only comes from repeated use. Around the base, the grass was worn away, muddy in a wide ring. I could see faint heel prints arcing outward, as if someone had paced in a slow circle again and again before finally letting go of the stick and walking on. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know what it felt like. Back at home, I made a decision. I packed up all the route sketches, the old maps, everything I'd drawn, and stuffed them into a grocery bag. I didn't throw them away, not yet, but I hid them in the crawl space behind the water heater, somewhere I wouldn't see them when I walked through the kitchen, somewhere out of reach of reflex. I didn't want to follow anymore, but I also couldn't forget where I'd been. That night was quiet, too quiet. I kept the blinds closed, the lights off. I slept on the couch with the fan running and one hand near my phone. It was sometime after midnight when I woke up, not from a noise but from the stillness, the kind that slips into a house and settles around your shoulders without a sound, the kind that lets you know you're not alone, even before you prove it. I sat up slowly. The fan had stopped, power outage maybe, but the digital clock on the microwave still glowed from the kitchen. The silence wasn't electronic. It was environmental, thick. I turned toward the hallway that led to the bedroom and bathroom, and that's when I heard it, knocking, not at the front door, not from outside, from inside the walls. 3 slow, distinct thumps from behind the drywall. The sound came from the far end of the hall, just beyond the bathroom door. It didn't echo like someone hitting plaster. It sounded heavier, like it had weight behind it, like a body leaning in. Then it moved, not fast, just steady. The knock traveled, 1 beat at a time, through the length of the wall toward me. I stepped back into the living room. It reached the corner, then stopped. I waited for it to start again, but it didn't. I stayed on the couch until dawn. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't check the hallway. When the sun finally came up, I walked through the apartment slowly, carefully. The walls looked normal. No holes, no cracks, no damage. But when I opened the hallway closet, I found something sitting on the top shelf that hadn't been there before. A folded black glove, thin, silk-like, with a frayed seam along the thumb, old-fashioned, the kind worn at funerals. Inside the glove was a single dry leaf, brown, curled in on itself like it had been plucked from a branch in another season. It wasn't from any tree I recognized. Its veins ran in a tight spiral toward the stem instead of out from it, like the leaf had been spun into shape instead of grown. I left the glove in the closet and shut the door. I didn't hear knocking again that day, but the pipes groaned every time I moved. Not in the usual way, not water pressure. They seemed to follow me, responding only when I stood still for too long. By evening, I finally gave in. I walked upstairs and knocked on Mrs. Salter's door. It took longer than usual for her to open it. When she did, she looked different, not tired, diminished, like something had been slowly hollowing her out from the inside. "I need to talk," I said. She stared at me for a moment. Then she opened the door all the way and stepped aside. Her apartment was cramped but warm, smelled like old books and tea. A cat I'd never seen before perched on the arm of the couch, watching me like it had been expecting someone. She didn't ask me to sit. She walked to the kitchen, filled 2 mugs, and handed me one. "I saw you out by the fence," she said. I nodded. "You're lucky they haven't come back yet. I didn't follow them." "You did," she said. "Maybe not with your feet, but with your eyes, with your questions. That's enough." She sat across from me and placed her mug on the table. "You want to know what they are?" I nodded again, slower this time. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the curtains were half drawn against the setting sun. "It used to be just one," she said. "A real funeral, long time ago. Woman down the street passed. Husband refused to bury her here, thought the soil was cursed, so he took her somewhere else. Somewhere farther than he should have." She rubbed her palm like it ached. "That night the funeral walked anyway. The road stayed empty, but the people came. They made the walk she was denied. No hearse, no body, just the walk. I didn't speak. Then another came, and another. People started watching, wondering. Some followed." She looked back at me. "Some came back different. Most didn't come back at all." "What is it?" I asked. "Some kind of punishment?" She shook her head. "It's not justice. It's not even malicious. It's just old. Older than the town. Maybe older than death. A placeholder, like a paper doll cut to fit a memory." "Why me?" "You asked," she said. "That's all it takes. You asked, and you looked, and you wondered where it ended." I felt something hollow out behind my ribs. "They know when someone's curious," she added. "They need that. Someone to follow. Doesn't have to be right behind them. Just behind enough." She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Don't walk the path again. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to see the end. Just let them pass. And if I don't, then the walk finishes with you." I didn't ask any more questions after that. I just sat there, letting her words hang like dust in the light. It was the first time someone had spoken plainly since I got to Ormsby Lane. The first time anyone had confirmed the thing was real. And not just real, but old. Real in the way droughts and famine were real. Something with no mind and no mercy. Something that didn't care if you were sorry. Mrs. Salter sipped her tea without looking at me. Her knuckles were pale against the porcelain, and her eyes kept drifting toward the clock even though the hands hadn't moved. I didn't follow it, I said weakly, knowing it wasn't true. I didn't mean to. She nodded once, but it wasn't comfort. You don't have to mean it, she said. You just have to do it. The cat on the armrest yawned without making a sound. Then it slipped down and disappeared under the couch. I couldn't hear its paws on the floor. Even it knew to stay quiet. You said it's a placeholder, I said. What does that mean? Mrs. Salter leaned back with a sigh and pulled the blanket tighter around her knees. She looked older than she had when I arrived, like each sentence she spoke drained a little more from her. They don't walk for anyone in particular, she said. They just walk. Every time someone gets too close, the space at the front of the line opens a little wider. It waits, like a door half shut. The next person who follows fills it, whether they mean to or not. And when they do, someone else disappears. Someone who didn't follow? Sometimes. Or someone who watched too closely, or asked the wrong person, or touched something left behind. She looked at me again. It's not about fairness. I wanted to ask who had disappeared when I followed, but I didn't. She set her mug down and stood up with difficulty. Her legs trembled under the blanket, and she braced herself against the table until the shaking passed. You need to stop keeping track, she said. No more drawings, no more walks, no more maps. Don't try to outsmart it. That's how it wins. I stood too. I felt heavy, like my clothes had been soaked and wrung out and left clinging to me. I burned the map, I said. The old one. It's gone. She looked at me longer than I wanted her to, as if deciding whether that would be enough. You'll know if it wasn't, she said quietly. Then she opened the door and stared into the hallway without stepping through. I can't help you more than this. I nodded. She didn't say goodbye. The next day, I tried to act like a person again. I made breakfast. I did the dishes. I answered emails. I told myself if I could get through one normal day without hearing footsteps or seeing handprints or finding shoes in the yard, then maybe things would settle. Maybe that had been the worst of it, and for most of the day, it worked. Until just after midnight when I heard the funeral again. This time, I didn't move to the window. I didn't peek through the blinds or open the door or even breathe too loudly. I turned off every light, sat in the far corner of the bedroom and waited. The footsteps were slower now, not sluggish, deliberate, measured. I counted 22 of them before I lost track. They passed the house the same way they always had, only this time I didn't see them. I didn't want to see them. Then the steps stopped, dead still, right outside. I held my breath. The walls felt too thin, the air too tight. No knock came, no voices, no movement, just waiting. I don't know how long it lasted, 10 minutes, maybe 30. At one point I thought I heard my name whispered, but I told myself it was just a shift in the floor above me, a creak in Mrs. Salter's apartment, anything else. And then, finally, the footsteps resumed, slowly, without hurry. They kept going and didn't come back. At sunrise, I opened the front door and looked across the street. Every house had a black ribbon tied to the mailbox, crisp, tidy, a thin silk loop with a knot in the center. Every house, except mine. Mine was bare. There was a dent in the top of the mailbox where something had pressed against it overnight. A long, narrow indentation, just the width of a hand laid flat. I stood there for a while, unsure if I should try to tie one myself, if that would be worse, if pretending to be marked was even more dangerous than not being marked at all. Eventually, I went back inside and left the mailbox alone. That day, no one spoke to me, not even the old man with the cane who walked past every morning with his paper bag. He usually nodded. This time, he didn't look up. I passed a woman pruning her hedges, and she turned her back before I could say anything. When I opened the fridge later, I found the milk had expired 2 days early. The digital clock on the microwave was stuck, not blinking. just stuck 311. Every time I checked it, it still said 311. I pressed buttons, it didn't change. That night, I slept with the lights on. No footsteps came, but around 2 a.m. the heater kicked on, even though I'd shut it off entirely. It clanged through the vents like something big had crawled inside and was trying to stretch out. I unplugged it. It kept running. At 2:40, it stopped on its own. The next morning, Mrs. Salter's window was closed. The curtains pulled tight. No movement upstairs. I left a note under her door. She didn't reply. When I checked again that evening, the note was gone, but I could hear her walking slowly above me, one step at a time, careful, centered. I stayed in for the next 2 nights. I didn't want to see if the funeral came back. I didn't want to know if it passed my house again. The third night, I left my phone on silent and didn't check the time once. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the crack in the ceiling that looked like a branch reaching for something. I didn't dream. I didn't sleep. When I finally got up to make coffee, the power flickered once, then settled. A thin strip of paper had been slid under the door. No writing on it, just a faint watermark, 2 overlapping shoes, left and right, facing away. They weren't drawn, they were real. Pressed into the fibers like a stamp made of damp leather. That was the morning I started packing a go bag. Something about getting ready to go made it harder to actually do it. Like I'd stepped into the first part of a decision and couldn't cross into the second. I kept it by the door, zipped tight. Water bottle, flashlight, burner phone, cash in an envelope. I even printed out an old paper map in case the GPS failed again. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Not the sound of footsteps, not a whisper. The heater stayed off and even the air felt different, like something was waiting for me to move first. Then the third night came. It was just past 1 in the morning. I was in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I hadn't heard anything yet, but I knew. I could feel it through the floorboards, through the weight of the silence settling on the street outside like a fog. The procession was back. I didn't move. I didn't stand. I didn't lift the curtain or inch toward the window. I curled tighter beneath the blanket and pressed my ear against the pillow, hoping the fabric would muffle the sound enough to pretend I wasn't listening. But the footsteps came anyway. They were slower this time, not dragging, just deliberate. 1 step, pause, another step, pause. Like each figure in line was thinking about each footfall before committing to it. They passed my window. I kept my eyes shut. Then they passed the front porch. Then they stopped. There were no sounds for a long while. I thought maybe they'd moved on. Maybe the silence had just caught up to itself. But then a new weight pressed against the air. I didn't hear it exactly. I felt it. The house didn't creak and the windows didn't rattle, but something had shifted. It was standing outside. I didn't need to see it, I knew. I could feel the space it took up, the way the air thinned as it faced the door, not moving, not knocking, just being. A void in the shape of a person, filled with all the weight of what I had done. I couldn't stop picturing it. Not a face, not even a body, just space, standing still on the other side of the threshold like it was waiting for something I'd already promised. I stayed like that until the sun came up. When I finally moved, my joints ached from how tightly I'd curled. My pillow was damp with sweat. I got up slowly and walked to the window. The street was empty. No shoe prints this time, no smudges, not even a shift in the dust on the curb. But when I opened the front door, the mailbox was different. Every house on the street had a black ribbon tied around the mailbox post, thick satin, carefully looped, except mine. Mine was bare. Not just ribbonless, wiped down, like it had been cleaned overnight. The smudge from yesterday's rain was gone. The small rust spot near the flag had vanished. In its place was a faint imprint, barely visible in the glare of morning light. A hand, pressed flat against the metal, 5 fingers, all there. I walked up and down the street, confirming what I already knew. Every other house had a ribbon. Even the abandoned duplex 2 doors down. the one with boarded windows and sagging gutters, a ribbon tied tight around the mailbox like it had never left. I wasn't marked like them. I wasn't marked at all. Back inside, the silence felt different. It had weight now, edges. I could almost hear it brushing the corners of the ceiling. I turned on the TV just to break it, but every channel came in fuzzy. Not static, just off. Voices slightly too slow, colors washed out, like someone had dubbed a tape over itself one too many times. I unplugged it. The burner phone I'd packed into the go bag vibrated, even though it wasn't on. I left it in the bag. That evening, I tried to call Mrs. Salter. Her line rang 5 times, then cut off. I didn't try again. Instead, I walked the block in a slow circle, watching each house from a distance. Lights came on behind curtains. Figures moved. But no one stepped out. No one waved. One window darkened as I passed, as if someone inside had just stepped away. I didn't go far. When I came back, something was sitting on my doormat. A ribbon, black, folded in half, not tied, not looped, just resting there. I bent down and picked it up. It was damp, like it had just come out of someone's pocket. When I brought it inside, the house felt colder. I placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for almost an hour. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up slumped at the table, the light overhead still on. The ribbon was gone. I stood and turned slowly, scanning the apartment. Every drawer was closed. Every cabinet as I left it. But when I stepped back to the front door, I saw it, tied around the inside knob, a perfect little knot, as if someone had been inside and marked me from within. I cut it off with a kitchen knife and threw it into the trash under the sink. The next morning, it was back on the knob. I didn't touch it again. That night, I heard the footsteps again, but this time, they didn't stop at my door. They stopped halfway down the street and stayed there. I waited in the dark, the ribbon still hanging behind me. Nothing moved. The footsteps didn't resume. The quiet stretched so long that I started to believe they'd disappeared completely. But when I finally risked a glance through the side curtain, I saw one of them standing still, not walking, not turning, just standing directly across the street from me. I couldn't make out their face. The porch light was off and the angle was too sharp. But I saw the outline, a long coat, shoulders just slightly too wide, hands at the sides, unmoving. They stood there for nearly 20 minutes. Then, without sound, turned and walked back the way they came. The rest of the line was gone. Only that one had waited. When I woke up the next morning, the black ribbon on my doorknob was gone again, but every house still had theirs. The trash bag under the sink was empty. The knife I'd used to cut the ribbon, gone. In its place was a single shoelace curled like a question mark. I kept the go bag in the trunk now. I checked it every morning, unzipping the black canvas just enough to confirm the envelope of cash was still there, the flashlight still charged, the burner phone still silent. I didn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Each night I waited for the sound of footsteps, the familiar hush that came before the funeral, but the quiet stretched longer, thinner. It wasn't a pause anymore. It was pressure, the kind that builds up before something gives. When I finally decided to leave, it wasn't out of panic, it was strategy. I didn't tell Mrs. Salter. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't lock the door. I just got in the car and drove. No boxes, no bags, just the keys and the ignition and both hands tied on the wheel. I took the main road east, past the old Exxon station and the billboard for the exterminator with the cartoon rat. At the 4-way stop, I kept right, staying on the county route that looped toward the highway. I could see the overpass just ahead, green signs blinking in the early light. And then the engine died. No warning, no sputter, it just cut. I coasted to the shoulder and stared at the dashboard. Check engine, oil pressure, battery. Everything lit up at once, then blinked off. I turned the key again. Nothing, not even a click. I stepped out into the gravel and popped the hood, though I had no idea what I expected to find. The engine bay was clean, silent. I leaned on the frame and exhaled hard, eyes stinging from the sun. Then I looked around. I knew this road. but not like this. The curve I'd just taken no longer sloped upward, it dipped, bending back toward town, and the trees on the left side of the road, the ones that should have been pine, were gone. In their place stood a long stretch of ash trees, bare and brittle, like they'd been burned from the inside out. I checked my phone. No bars, the map didn't load, just a blank grid. I tried turning around. I got the car to roll a few feet in reverse, enough to shift it downhill. But every turn I took after that brought me back to the same stretch of asphalt. No signage, no exit, just variations on a road that never left. Eventually I saw a fork in the trees ahead. I followed it. It opened to a narrow dirt lane I'd never noticed before, even though I should have passed it a dozen times. And standing in the middle of it, at the far end, near a bend in the path, was a figure. Black coat, hands at the sides, head slightly tilted, waiting. I hit the brakes. They didn't move. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles burned. My mouth was dry. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to drive off the shoulder, to do anything but stay here. But there was nowhere left to go. I opened the door and stepped out. The gravel shifted beneath my feet. The wind picked up, just once, just long enough to catch the hem of my jacket and flick it forward, like a hand nudging me down the path. The figure didn't move. I walked a few feet down the dirt lane, then stopped. The moment I stepped off the gravel, the tree shifted. The light behind me dimmed. And even though I couldn't hear anything, I felt something starting. I turned back to the car. It was gone. Not vanished, just not where I left it, as if I'd taken one too many steps forward and the idea of it had been erased. I stood there, caught between forward and back, and then, slowly, the figure raised its arm, not fast, not threatening, just lifted it, palm out, and pointed, not at me, past me. I turned around. The procession was behind me, dozens of them, maybe more, aligned across the road, shoulder to shoulder, like they'd never left. They weren't walking this time. They were waiting. I didn't run. I backed away slowly, breath caught high in my chest. Each step I took toward the tree line seemed to stretch longer than it should, like the ground was widening beneath me, and the figures didn't follow. They just watched. I moved until I couldn't see them anymore. Then I turned and walked into the trees. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I found a creek at some point, crossed it, kept going, my shoes soaked through, socks squishing against my heels. When I came out the other side, I was on the shoulder of another road, and just ahead, maybe 20 yards, was a sign. Welcome to Ormsby Lane. I don't remember how I got back inside. I think I walked through the back lot. The apartment door was unlocked, the light still off. The black ribbon was back on the knob. This time it was nailed in place. No loop, just pressed flat and pinned through the wood, bent metal holding the tail against the frame like a signature. I left it there. I didn't sleep. I unplugged everything, turned off my phone, sat in the kitchen with the light off and the tap dripping in the sink. At 3:08 a.m., the tap stopped on its own, and something creaked from the hallway. I didn't go check. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see if I opened the door. The ribbon still nailed in place, the knob turning once, gently as if tested, but never pulled. Because I wasn't supposed to follow anymore. They were waiting for something else. I knew what I had to do, even before I stepped outside. It wasn't about stopping them. That was never the point. You can't stop a storm. You can only get out of its way, or learn how to rebuild once it's passed. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but maybe I could unmap it. Unmake the thing I'd helped draw into this place by retracing every step, every mistake. I waited until dusk, then left with a backpack and a lighter. The notebook was in there too. The second one, the one I hadn't burned yet. The one with all the redraws, the wrong turns, the corrupted intersections and scribbled margins. It felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. I walked the route backward, starting at the cracked sidewalk where I'd first seen the Prince curve, past the old gas station. past the tree stump with the rusted nails hammered into it, past the telephone pole where my sketch showed 3 wires but now only had 2. It was quiet. No wind, no birds. Even the insects seemed to have vanished. I reached the gate by twilight. The cemetery was just as I remembered it, only older. The fence sagged lower, the lock rusted deeper. The chain hung open this time, though I hadn't touched it. A strip of torn ribbon was looped through one of the links, black, frayed, fluttering faintly even in the stillness. I stepped through. The dirt under my shoes felt loose, like walking on packed ash. My foot left no prints. I walked to the center of the field, where the path had always ended. No headstones here, just rows of bare indentations in the grass, as if dozens of graves had been dug and filled without markers, over and over. In the middle of it all, the walking stick still stood, still upright, still untouched. I pulled out the notebook and flipped through it one last time. I didn't need to read anything. The lines were burned into my head now, but I wanted to be sure. I tore the pages out, one by one, and dropped them in a ring around the stick. Then I lit them. The flame spread fast, like the paper had been waiting to burn. The smoke curled straight up. No wind, no drift, just a black column rising above the graves. And I spoke, not a prayer, not an apology, just 2 words, no more. The stick fell sideways on its own. I didn't pick it up. I walked home without looking back. That night I stayed awake until morning. No knocks, no breathing, no ribbon. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was hollow, like the sound had been carved out of the space. When I stepped outside at sunrise, the black ribbon on my mailbox was gone. So were all the others. Even the old man with the cane didn't have one. The street looked ordinary for the first time in weeks, but I wasn't. My hands shook now when I held a pen. My scalp had started to itch in patches, and when I checked in the mirror, I found a single white streak running from temple to crown. My thoughts sometimes slipped sideways, whole minutes gone between blinking. I forgot the names of certain roads, even though I'd walked them 100 times. I once opened a drawer and stared into it, unable to remember what it was for. And no one spoke to me anymore, not even Mrs. Salter. I knocked once on her door just to see if she'd answer. Her light was on. I could hear the creak of furniture inside. But she didn't come. She didn't need to. A week passed, then 2, and then one morning I saw a moving truck. It backed into the driveway of the vacant house 2 doors down, the one with the slanted roof and the dead hydrangeas in the front yard. I stood behind my curtain and watched as a woman stepped out, late 30s maybe, clean sneakers, smiling as she spoke to the man unloading boxes from the passenger seat. A little girl ran across the lawn, laughing, her arms held wide like airplane wings. They looked happy, new, untouched. And then I saw her. Mrs. Salter. She was standing on her porch in a fresh cardigan, her cane tucked under one arm. Her eyes were crinkled the same way they'd been when I first met her. She smiled gently and walked down the steps, waving at the woman as she approached. They shook hands. I opened my window a crack. The wind carried her voice across the lawn like it had been waiting for me to hear it. "You can watch the funeral," she said, soft and kind. "Just don't follow it." I didn't realize my hand was pressed against the glass until I saw the faint smear left behind. Later that night, I stood in the hallway with the lights off, staring at the knob to my front door. There was no ribbon, no knocking, just the quiet, like it had been reset, not erased, just waiting. I'm not the placeholder, not anymore. But I remember everything, and the space it left behind is still here,